Will artificial intelligence create a colorblind justice system? I'm Scott Ott, and this is Bill Whittle Now. And Bill, in the city of San Francisco, they are experimenting with using AI, artificial intelligence, to try to reduce racial bias when considering whether to charge suspects with a crime. The district attorney, George Gaskin, says his goal is to take race out of the equation. And so this electronic system of theirs in police reports will automatically remove a suspect's name, race, hair, and eye color. It'll also remove the names of witnesses and police officers, as well as specific neighborhoods or districts that could indicate the race of those people who are involved. All of this in the interest of creating a colorblind society. Now, before I leave it at that, after they review that and use that to determine whether charges should be pressed, they'll actually go back and cross-reference it with the full report. So they're not only using the AI, but also using human intelligence. On the face of this, Bill, isn't it great to see that finally Democrats in California have figured out a way to achieve their goals of racial justice?
You know, as most of you who watch the show know by now, I have no idea what these questions are. And so this may change on just a few moments reflection. I am, as a general rule, very disinclined to get people out of the loop in terms of justice. I think mandatory sentencing was necessary because so many judges were handing out lenient sentences, but a solid judge should be able to make those distinctions. And so I have to tell you, I disagree with your statement, but I really like the idea on its face. The reason I disagree with your statement is to suggest that a colorblind society is what the left is looking for. Au contraire, color is the only thing the left sees, and it's the only thing they care about. When they say they want a diverse faculty, what they mean is they want different people of different ethnic groups, but they don't want any diversity of thought. Heaven forbid, that could lead to some serious problems for them. So it is the Frankfurt School, which is a group of Marxists that started the Institute for Marxism after World War I, realized that the revolution, the communist revolution, paradise on earth, was not going to come through the workers. I'm making a point here. Was not going to come through the workers because capitalism was producing so much benefit for workers that they were never going to have this revolution. So these communist deep thinkers at the Frankfurt School decided that in order to bring this revolution around, they would have to make the victims, the vanguard of the revolution, the dispossessed. And they moved to America in order to flee Nazi Germany for their lives and live in a country that gave them sanctuary and freedom and security from prosecution, and then immediately sat down and did their very best to figure out how to destroy that society. And what they came up with was this idea of political correctness and critical theory, which is to take the entire United States of America, which if you leave it at its essence, despite its historical flaws, e pluribus unum is, you can't beat it, out of many one. We're one people who share a common experience, and we all like this idea that's called America. Well, this is an unbeatable idea. So what critical thinking did when it was introduced to colleges back in the 60s was it basically said, cut the country up into pie slices generally by color, but what it came down to was by grievance group. And rather than having these little tribes fight with each other, have everything attack the middle. And if you decide to criticize this, then we'll use political correctness to throw your entire argument out of court. So I mention all of this to simply say that the entire strategy of the modern progressive left is to have the opposite of a colorblind society, where race is a factor in everything, where when you have a philosophy that says that your level of truthfulness is determined by your level of victimhood, this is the only way you can play that game. So on initial hearing, I think this is grand. I've often thought it would be just the ticket if there was a way, although God knows there are so many different potential ways to screw this up. But if there was a way for the news to be delivered by a machine that simply reported what actually happened and let you decide what the consequences were, the Democrats would never win again, ever. So anything that accomplishes a colorblind society is something that I'm definitely in favor of. Now, there may be a downside to this that I haven't really considered yet, but to say that this is something that the Democrats want or the progressives want is just plain nuts. It's the conservatives who have been for decades saying that college applications should be colorblind, that census on a lot of levels should be colorblind, that when somebody fills out a form for something, this idea of checking a box that says race is archaic. We are the ones who've been trying to get rid of this, and the left's response is, oh, you're trying to keep black people down by making sure that there is no way to know whether they're black or not. I don't see the logic in that. I think if this works, and I'd like to see somebody who knows what they're talking about with AI tell me how this could go wrong. But as a first impulse, I think it's a grand idea. It just doesn't belong to them. That's all.
Well, Bill, here's what the kind of thing that sparked this and just kind of gives the lie to what you were just talking about how somehow we can be individualistic and take all of race out of it. Because in reality, African Americans in this 2017 study by the San Francisco District Attorney, African Americans represent only 6% of that county's population, but accounted for 41% of arrests between 2000, meaning they were being arrested, not performing the arrest, between 2008 and 2014. However, the study also found little evidence of overt bias against any one race or ethnic group. So what they're trying to pick up on here is subtle, perhaps unconscious racial bias, the kind that other studies have shown. For example, when women audition in blind auditions for orchestras, they're much more likely to get hired by an orchestra when the audition is blind, and the same sort of situation. So even, Bill, if all your conservative buddies are essentially already race blind, isn't it possible that deep down inside of us, we are making decisions in the moment based on biases and bigotry?
There's no question about that. And I have never claimed that conservatives were either race blind or made out of 24 karat gold as far as their personalities is concerned. My entire theory of government, my theory of a free press, my theory of just about everything is predicated on the idea that this country and its ideals need to be defended because it is the least bad way to deal with the defects inherent in the human heart. And to say that there is no racial bias is nuts. Now, conversely, to say that the 6% of the population committing 41% or getting 41% of the arrest, to say that that's based exclusively on racism, that's utter nonsense as well. And so if it turns out that some significant percentage, let's say 5% or 10, whatever, if it turns out that 5 or 10% of that 41% are being arrested because of an anti-black bias, or being tried, or whatever the case may be, or
it's the prosecution question, really
being indicted. Yeah. If it turns out that bias is there, then for God's sakes, let's get rid of that bias. Let's do it now. Let's do it yesterday. I don't want to see any innocent person go into jail. I don't want to see people who haven't done anything wrong being treated like they have done things wrong. And to the degree that this takes everybody's bias out of the picture. And by the way, can we just say this so it's said? When we talk about things like racial bias, that is the assumption that white people are discriminating against black people. But to pretend that black people don't discriminate against white people is nuts. And so anything that
but the white people are not the oppressed minority. So they, even if they are receiving some sort of racial discrimination or bigotry from black people, they're not going to suffer in anywhere near the numbers and the intensity that they would if they were in a minority with less of a voice.
Well, that's utterly BS, and you know it. We have for decades now, certainly, lived in a society where the cult of victimhood trumps everything, and we know that the only people who can openly be attacked in this culture today are straight Christian males. To claim otherwise is to have yourself in need of a head examination. We know that's utterly nonsense. So when I'm saying that it eliminates racial bias, I'm not just saying it eliminates white on black or white on Hispanic racial bias. It eliminates racial bias, period. It means that if the guy who raped the girl was named, Thurston Howell IV, and that he attended Yale when he wasn't at the yacht club, it means that this guy would have as much of a chance at a fair trial as somebody who you would tend to think would be the victim of some of these things. I'm not trying to say that these are equivalent situations. I'm not saying that at all. I'm saying that to eliminate personal bias from the justice system to whatever degree possible without the law of unintended consequences coming up and biting us is not only something that I think is noble. I think it's been something that conservatives have been campaigning on and using to identify themselves for 3 or 4 decades now. So this is the part I'm objecting to. It's not the part about getting rid of the racial bias. Of course there's racial bias. Of course there is. I'm not saying that there isn't, and I never said that there was. Let's take Black Lives Matter, for example. Okay? My objection to Black Lives Matter is when I disagree with Black Lives Matter, I'm not saying that there are not occasions when white police officers treat black suspects differently than they would treat white suspects. I'm not saying that at all. What I'm saying with Black Lives Matters is that if you look at, I think it was 2017 we had the last data for, of all of the black Americans who were killed in 2017, 4% of them were killed by policemen under any circumstances, including starting shooting at a policeman. My problem with Black Lives Matter is not that they don't have a case. My problem with Black Lives Matter is that if you're going to ignore 96% of the murders and concentrate on the 4% of the murders and pretend that this 96%, which is black on black violence mostly, doesn't exist, then I've got a problem with you in terms of using this as a political weapon. But fair is fair, and I just want fair. And I don't want anybody in this country to suffer because of racial bias under any forms.
So apparently the software was developed by Stanford University, and they have said that the program is going to start in July, and they will be reviewing the progress every week to see if there is a disparity between the artificial intelligence, essentially the redacted reports that the AI robot is looking at, versus the decisions that would be made if the reports were not redacted with racial characteristics. And if it proves successful, apparently they have offered to put that software into the public arena for free. In other words, the San Francisco AI would be rolled out across the country and available freely to local police and county police departments.
Now, I would like to stress also that I am not, certainly at this point, I am not advocating artificial intelligence juries. This is a fundamental distinction. And if there's any confusion on this point, let me eliminate it now. The jury process, the process of a trial by your peers, is a human event. There are many, many ways that event can produce injustice. But to try and turn it into a computer program, I think, is to deny the essential humanity of the trial process. And what I mean by that is so much of what we take in as human beings is not just data that comes in through our ears and goes into our brains. So much of what we take in as human beings are visual cues, our senses of empathy or lack of empathy. Sometimes these can be deceptive and lead us to erroneous conclusions. But I think more often than that, they give us a real sense of what actually happened by listening to the emotional tone of the people who are testifying on either side. I think that's really essential, despite the errors that can be brought into it. The reason I like this idea is that it's not interfering in that process. It is simply saying we are going to make the indictment process free from any racial bias, either pro-black, anti-black, or whatever the case may be. Anti-white, doesn't matter. We're going to get rid of it. They're not, if I understand correctly, and this again is an important decision, it's not an AI deciding whether or not this person should be indicted or not. It's an AI that's looking at the report and is searching for even the most subtle little hints that can be placed into a human written report to indicate bias on the part of the arresting officer or whatever the case may be. So unless I'm missing something, and it certainly wouldn't be the first time, I happen to think this is a grand idea.
Relying almost completely on natural intelligence 5 days a week, Bill Whittle now brings you Bill's analysis of the news of the day and even breaking technological news about our justice system, as we've seen here. This is the kind of thing that the folks who make this program just love, and they fund it. They make it possible. We're grateful to them. They use their own natural intelligence to make that decision to go to billwhittle.com and click that Become a Member link. And we really don't care if you use the brain between your own ears or some sort of AI device to make that decision. Just make the decision today. Go to billwhittle.com and click that Become a Member link. For Bill Whittle, I'm Scott Ott. Thanks to the members for making this possible.